Welcome back, everyone, to another reaction video. We're going to dive back into one of the most popular channels that I could possibly do a reaction to, and that is Dr. Mike with nearly 15 million subscribers now. Now, he's not a history channel, but he often does topics that are related to medical history, and I think that's appropriate for us. It's one of the lenses through which to view history, right, is medicine and doctors and illness and how it has an impact on history. And this particular video is called The Worst Medical Failures in History. I'll link it down in the description below, so as always, you can check it out without my commentary as well as the other content from Dr. Mike. I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Daniel Luster for your support on Patreon. Really appreciate it. Let's dive into this one.
Physician, I frequently speak with patients and viewers who are hesitant to take medical advice. They don't trust doctors, hospitals, or the healthcare system in general. They claim doctors are sheep. They think pharmaceutical companies are only interested in money. They believe government is not interested in bodily autonomy. And in some cases, to some degree, they may be correct. One area where I think we definitely need to do better is transparency, especially in owning up to our mistakes. Not just as a form of apology, but also to ensure that we're learning from them so they are not repeated.
Right, and this is such an important life lesson, right? I mean, you can't avoid making mistakes. And doctors are no different than any other profession in that they're not always going to get it right. Unfortunately, because their profession so often deals with life and death, their mistakes come with a greater cost sometimes than if you are a YouTuber who makes a mistake on a video, right? I mean, the consequences of my mistakes are completely different than the consequences of his mistakes. And that's a choice that people make when they go into that profession, and they understand that. And it's important for us to keep that philosophy in general, is that we can't avoid making mistakes. All we can do is learn not only from ours, but from other people's, and that it goes for history as well.
From hiding cures of preventable diseases, to giving children polio, to attempting to erase entire racial groups through lies and deceit. I'm a doctor, I believe in science, but I also believe in the truth, which includes acknowledging where medicine has made catastrophic mistakes. Huge thanks to Ground News for sponsoring this video.
And you know, this goes back to something I said on my video for the 250th anniversary of the United States. When you love your country, or when you love your profession as a doctor, or whatever it might be, loving it doesn't mean turning a blind eye to the mistakes we've made. Loving my country as an American does not mean I pretend that America is perfect and has never made mistakes. It's because I love my country that I want to acknowledge those mistakes so we can do better next time. And I think that's where he's coming from with this too.
Have you ever heard of syphilis? There's a good chance you have, and there's a better chance that if you were to ever get it, you'd be able to treat it right away with a dose of penicillin, available at any pharmacy with a prescription. And if you treat it early, it's really not that big of a deal.
Which is crazy to think. People keep talking about, oh boy, life was so much better 50 or 100 years ago. No. When stuff like that could kill you, stuff that's easily treated now, no.
It wasn't always this way. You see, syphilis is a bacterial infection most commonly transmitted through sex. It starts with a small sore called a canker at the site of infection, and if it's left untreated, the disease can worsen over time, causing rashes, hair loss, muscle aches, fever, and even sore throat. Now, if it gets to late-stage syphilis, it can impact your nervous system, your heart, and even cause blindness.
Al Capone, that's what he had, was late-stage syphilis.
Eventually, it can kill you. So in 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service began a study to research the long-term effects of syphilis. The goal was to record the natural progression of the disease when left untreated, but the study itself was wickedly evil. It enrolled 399 black men with syphilis and 201 uninfected black men to serve as controls. They offered men an annual free physical and other perks like meals, transportation, and burial insurance. For 600 poor black men in the South at the height of the Great Depression, this offer was too good to pass up. Unfortunately,
context, the Great Depression, for anybody, the opportunity to make money at a time when you have, 20-25% unemployment, when a lot of people, even middle-class people, were just making the interest payments on their mortgage, just trying to get by. A lot of people didn't even have that.
The scientists did not tell the men the purpose behind their study. They did not tell them that they were testing them for syphilis, nor did they tell them if they tested positive. And in 1945, when CDC was recommending penicillin as a treatment for syphilis, the scientists didn't tell them that either. Their logic was that you can't study.
Wow. So a scientific study where you want to test the progression of the disease, but you've got a potential cure, but we're not going to cure them because that would get in the way of our study, which is to study the progression of the disease. Wow.
Study the long-term effects of syphilis if you cure your patients. Pretty dark and unethical. A whistleblower within the Public Health Service went to the press, and a story eventually ran on the front page of the New York Times. The public outcry was intense, and federal health officials ended the study in 1972 after 40 friggin' years. Of the original 399 men, reported figures say 28 died of syphilis, 100 died of syphilis-related complications, 40 of the men's wives had been infected, and 19 of the children were born with the disease.
I have a ancestor, a fourth great grandfather, who was in the U.S. Civil War and got some kind of a disease. It may have been syphilis from the description that I've seen. Ended up having to leave the service. His wife got pregnant, had a baby. The baby was just covered from head to toe in sores when it was born. He died soon after. Just awful, awful stuff. That's one of the things with these sexually transmitted diseases. It's not just the people themselves that it hurts. It hurts anybody in their family that they might infect with it.
In 1974, the men and their families settled with the federal government for $10 million. In 1997, President Bill Clinton issued a formal presidential apology. In the late 1970s, we certified the global eradication of smallpox, ridding the world of a disease that had ravaged humanity for millennia.
Now, we talked about this in a recent video where we talked about the potential, for example, of places where ice thaws out and people are buried under that, and it exposes bodies of people who died with smallpox decades or even a century or more ago. Just because it's been eradicated doesn't mean it's forever eradicated.
Unfortunately, a new threat emerged around the same time: AIDS. Acquired immunodeficiency syndrome begins as human immunodeficiency virus,
HIV,
or
yeah.
HIV. It attacks specific immune cells, making you more vulnerable to other infections and diseases.
And this is a great point he makes. And having grown up during the AIDS crisis in the 80s, I can remember, this was it was scary. A lot of people early on spun it as just a gay disease, but it was very soon apparent it was something that everyone had to be afraid of. And it seemed like one of those things they were never going to be able to cure. And the fact that they've got a treatment now that can basically all but guarantee that you will survive if you have HIV and you don't get to full-blown AIDS. But like a lot of other diseases, it's not AIDS itself that kills you. It's that AIDS weakens your body to the point where something else kills you. A lot of the people who died during the flu pandemic in 1919, 1920 didn't die directly from influenza. They died because the influenza made them susceptible to other things like pneumonia, and that's what killed them.
If left untreated, HIV can turn into AIDS, at which point the immune system gets so weak that you become highly susceptible to infections
sarcoma,
like tuberculosis, toxoplasmosis, and without treatment, people with AIDS typically only survive about 3 years. It's thought to have been transferred from chimpanzees to humans in Central Africa in the early 20th century, likely through hunting and butchering infected bushmeat.
Right.
However, it wasn't truly recognized until the early 1980s when doctors began seeing these clusters of rare infections and cancers among previously healthy gay men, especially in Los Angeles, New York, and other major cities.
So, because so many people early on who had this disease, it was breaking out in these gay communities, it became in people's mindsets a gay disease. But like a lot of things, that's just where it first was noticed. We call the flu pandemic from 100 years ago the Spanish flu. It didn't start in Spain. It started, the first recorded cases were in North America, but Spain was one of the first ones to acknowledge that it was happening because they weren't part of World War I, and that's a whole story in and of itself. But this unfortunately led to this stigma with this disease that it took someone like Ryan White to break that stigma. Ryan White was just a young kid who got a blood transfusion and became the face of AIDS. Someone who people saw as an innocent victim who hadn't done anything. Not that gay people being gay people meant that they deserved to die, but that was how a lot of people viewed it.
While there is no cure yet for HIV or AIDS, we have developed treatments that can dramatically slow its spread and reduce its impact on the human body.
Right.
But in the early years of the epidemic, those treatments either did not exist or were painfully limited. Critics argue that those delays were made worse by stigma, political indifference, and a terribly slow federal response.
Right.
While the US government did not create AIDS, of course, its response helped shape how much suffering went ignored.
We've made remarkable progress, as you've heard. Work on a vaccine is now underway in many laboratories, as you've been told. This fiscal year, the federal government plans to spend $317 million on AIDS research. It's also important that America not reject those who have the disease, care for them with dignity and kindness.
It took a while for Reagan to get there, but it is super important that he said those things and that commitment came. It should have come sooner. And, somebody else who doesn't get nearly enough credit in fighting AIDS is George W. Bush, who spearheaded a huge intervention in sub-Saharan Africa, where it was continuing as the United States and other developed nations got on top of this crisis. In Africa, it was still spreading like wildfire because they didn't have access to the treatments that people had elsewhere. And Bush's commitment, financial commitment, and scientific commitment to that place made a huge difference.
Sounds pretty good, right? Throwing big financial weight behind a cure and urging Americans to be compassionate to those who were suffering. Unfortunately, this address wasn't delivered until 1987,
Right. Yeah.
nearly 6 years after the CDC's first public report of the condition. By the end of 1987, there were more than 50,000 cases and 40,000 deaths.
Now, to push back a little bit, I agree that the government's response was slow to this, and this is a very common criticism. But 40,000 deaths, wow, that's 40,000 too many. When you think about how many people die from other causes, you can start to understand why the government maybe didn't initially understand. Because it was less than this. We're talking 1987. So in 81, 82, 83, it's far less. Again, in hindsight, 2020 should have done more. But you can see why maybe the government was slow on this.
Can you imagine if nobody responded to COVID until 2026? In the early days...
But see, COVID had killed 1 million people by 2026, not 40 or 50,000.
AIDS was derided as a gay plague. Before being called HIV and AIDS, the disease was named GRID, Gay-Related Immune Deficiency Syndrome. Listen to the laughter during this White House press briefing in 1982.
It's known as gay plague. No, it is. I mean, it's a pretty serious thing that 1 in every 3 people that get this have died, and I wonder if the president is aware of it.
I don't have it. Are you? Do you?
You don't have it. Well, I'm relieved to hear that, Larry. In other words, the White House looks on this as a great joke.
The reputation for the condition didn't get better either. HIV started to spread amongst people sharing needles for drug use and among sex workers. Tragically, many ended up considering the disease a good thing, purifying the world of sin. Jerry Falwell, a famous religious leader and key political ally of Ronald Reagan, said, AIDS is not just God's punishment for homosexuals, it's God's punishment for the society that tolerates homosexuals.
Shut up, Jerry. That is not the least bit helpful.
President Reagan changed his tune and began to take the illness more seriously when it impacted his longtime friend and Hollywood movie star, Rock Hudson.
And isn't that how it goes? Until it impacts you personally, you don't take things seriously very often. Then suddenly it's like, okay, maybe there is something to this.
Seeing it up close really made the president feel the intensity of the illness, and 2 years after that, the full weight of the U.S. government was finally put behind finding a cure. Despite being aware of these historical tragedies, recently RFK Jr.'s HHS has canceled hundreds of millions of dollars in federal grants and terminated over 230 HIV-related research grants. So all this time later, we're still working on it, after a regrettably late start and delays galore, but perhaps there is hope on the horizon. The words 1909 Asexualization Act should send shivers down your spine, but more on that in a second. The United States has a long and ugly history with eugenics, which is the scientifically discredited belief that a population can be improved by controlling who is allowed to reproduce.
The Germans in the 1930s, who really in their minds perfected the art of eugenics, pointed to the United States and our treatment of other races and our views by a minority of people in this country on eugenics as a justification for their own version of that and taking it to overdrive.
This is literal Nazi territory.
Yep.
At various times throughout history, the United States has experimented with different forms of forced sterilization. Laws were passed that allowed medical professionals and state institutions to deem a person unfit to procreate and sterilize them through a variety of horrible means, from chemical castration to surprise hysterectomies.
Wrap your mind around that for a second. The government, the government deciding that you are unfit to be able to reproduce, and then forcing that upon you by treating your ability to reproduce moving forward, by taking that away from you.
Where a woman's uterus is removed without her consent. This was forced on a wide variety of folks, from the disabled, psychiatric patients, to Black people, Latinas, Native Americans, and any others deemed undesirable by those in power. And California was the worst offender in the US by passing this asexualization
California.
Act. Between 1909 and 1979, this act and many others resulted in more than 20,000 Californians being sterilized, accounting for more than 1/3 of all officially recorded sterilizations nationwide. Across the country, more than 60,000 people were sterilized under these laws. This isn't ancient history either. Between 2006 and 2010, investigative reporting found that nearly 150 women incarcerated in California prisons received tubal ligations, what people often call getting their tubes tied. A later state audit reviewed 144 of those cases over an 8-year period and found that nearly 1/3 were performed without proper legal consent. At this point, the laws in the U.S.
So here's my question: What are they defining as without proper legal consent? Is there some, if we're talking about the woman did not give her consent to have it done, then I agree that shouldn't have happened. But that wording to me makes me think that there's some loophole we're talking about here, where maybe the woman wanted it done, but wasn't in a legal, didn't have the ability to maybe didn't sign the forms or something like that. So I'm curious to know if there's more to this story. Okay, it's what I thought. I just took about 10 minutes and did some research into this, and it sounds like the definition in this case of not having the proper consent has to do with federal funding of the tubal ligations. That somehow these tubal ligations were provided to these women without all the required government approvals taking place. So none of these women got these things against their will or without their knowledge. They all were willing participants. Now, there are some articles that I was reading that imply that they were heavily pressured by prison medical officials to get this done, especially women who had served multiple prison sentences, that they were really pushing them to do this. So you might argue that maybe that was out of line. But just understand in the context here, we're not talking about women who had this done against their will.
That allows such horrifying behavior have mostly been repealed or rendered effectively useless. But the damage has already been done. Doctors and governments have taken advantage of countless numbers of our most vulnerable people,
True.
All in an effort to try and shape the genetic makeup of America to their liking. Horrible. What's so brutal about this next one is that not only was there an initial mistake, but also an overcorrection that led to even more suffering. Poliomyelitis, or polio for short, was ravaging the US in the early 1950s. Most people who get polio will experience no physical symptoms at all, but others won't be as lucky. Some will have flu-like symptoms that can clear up on their own, while others will develop meningitis, paralysis, and in the worst cases, death. You may have seen photos like this from back in the day of polio victims inside iron lungs.
Actually, in the news just this week, I believe there was the last person who was still in one of these iron lungs who just passed away.
These were gigantic devices that could allow someone paralyzed by polio, often a child, to continue to breathe. It's a horrifying disease, and America was struggling. Dr. Jonas Salk was eventually successful in creating a safe and effective vaccine. And after years of testing and trials, it was finally time for mass production.
A lot of people died from the polio
Five pharmaceutical
vaccine.
companies were given the green light to manufacture it, including Cutter Labs in California. Unfortunately, Cutter made a catastrophic manufacturing error. You see, Salk's vaccine was inactivated, which means it used real pieces of the virus in his recipe, but the virus was 100% dead. But in some batches made by Cutter, the virus had not been properly inactivated.
So they're literally giving people polio through the vaccine.
Live polio virus made it into the vaccine, which meant, yes, some people developed immunity, while others came down with full-blown polio. Wow. Cutter's vaccine resulted in 40,000 cases of polio. It paralyzed over 150 people, most of them children. 10 died. You see, Jonas Salk's vaccine wasn't to blame. When properly made, the vaccine worked, and it helped drive polio cases down.
But it's stories like that that people look at when new vaccines come out and say, look, this is what we're afraid of. And it's an understandable fear, but it's also important to temper that fear with context and understand, like he's saying, that in this case, the vaccine itself was safe. You had a company who improperly made the vaccine.
But in the years that followed, the US government overcorrected by phasing out his vaccine and replacing it with the one from Dr. Albert Sabin. One vaccine is as good as the other, right? Well, not exactly. Sabin's was a live attenuated vaccine, meaning it contained a live but weakened polio virus. It had major advantages. It was given by mouth, it was easier to distribute, and it was very effective at stopping the virus from spreading in communities. But there was a catch. In extremely rare cases, the weakened virus could mutate and cause paralysis. Yes, it was less than 1%, but who wants to gamble with those odds?
Right,
The United States used the Sabin vaccine for the next 40 years. While it contributed to a heavy decline of the disease, every year a few people would get their polio vaccine and wind up contracting the disease itself. Jonas Salk never backed down from arguing that his inactivated vaccine was the safer choice, which it was, and finally in the 1990s, the US government changed its mind again and switched back to using Salk's
Dang, so I had the other one? Oh, that's a little scary to think about.
vaccine exclusively. Today, thanks to the efforts of both the Salk and Sabin vaccines, polio has been isolated to just a few remote pockets in Asia and Africa. It's nearly been eradicated from Earth, but not without a few major bumps along the way. Smoking is bad for you. Look at me.
One of my all-time favorite scenes in a movie. If you haven't seen The King's Speech with Colin Farrell, phenomenal movie. There's a scene where the king, future King George VI, who was well known to be a heavy smoker, is smoking, and he's at therapy for his, to treat his stammer, and he pulls out a cigarette, and Dr. Lionel Logue, who's treating him, says, I don't allow smoking. And the Duke of York at the time, and the future king, says, well, my doctors told me that it's good for me. It'll relax my throat muscles. And Logue says, well, they're idiots. And the king says, they've all been knighted. And then Logue says, makes it official then. Love that so much.
Doctor warning against smoking. Way to go, Mike. Really sticking your neck out with that one, huh? Turns out doctors used to sing a different tune about smoking tobacco. Check this out.
What cigarette do you smoke? You'll be interested to know how the doctors of America answered that question.
So, this is the kind of thing that for us in 2026, it's just common sense. You're like, how could you possibly think that was anything but terrible for your lungs? But they did. A lot of people did. Now, a lot of people also understood, right? It's like in history, look at slavery. We look back now and think, how could you possibly think that owning other human beings was okay? But a lot of people did. Think what today we think is perfectly fine for our bodies that 100 years from now, I'm thinking probably a lot of the food that we eat, a lot of the stuff that we put into our food, like the corn syrup and the fats and the sugars and the just the nasty processed food. 100 years from now, they might look back on us and think, how on earth could you think that was okay to put in your body?
Thousands of doctors in all parts of the country, in every state of the union. Doctors in every branch of medicine were asked,
"What cigarette do you smoke, doctor?"
in this nationwide survey of general practitioners, surgeons, throat specialists,
Well, this is awkward.
diagnosticians, and so on, the brand named most was Camel.
Yes, according to this survey, more doctors smoke Camels than any other cigarette.
What an advertisement. This is like more dentists choose Crest than any other toothpaste.
Try Camels yourself.
Pretty wild, right? To see doctors actually advocate for smoking. Cigarette advertising dominated American culture in the early and
Cartoons.
mid-20th century, with commercials like those for Camels to Lucky Strike claiming their toasting process made their cigarettes less irritating on the throat. Yeah. Lucky Strike urged women to reach for a Lucky instead of a Sweet. Wink, wink, smoke our cigarettes and you'll be skinny. Gross. Highly respected medical journals like the New England Journal of Medicine and the Journal of the American Medical Association accepted big advertisements in their publications, and tobacco companies didn't just buy ad space. They also funded clinical studies designed to cast doubt on smoking's dangers.
And this is why you had the huge lawsuits that came later on, is because they were doing this kind of stuff.
And the journals published them. They weren't just marketing cigarettes, but manufacturing biased research to make experts believe cigarettes weren't so bad.
And again, what do you think might be happening now? I mean, obviously we have more safeguards in place to double and triple check that this kind of research isn't going on, but it could be.
Now, while cigarette advertising has been significantly regulated off America's TVs and magazines, believe me when I tell you that there are no shortage of dangerously addictive companies coming to take their place.
Right.
Gambling companies. I'm looking at you. Henrietta Lacks, a black woman from Maryland, died
this is a
from
great story.
complications associated with cervical cancer in 1951. But that's just the beginning of her story.
I mean, it's not great how it all went down, but it's great what has ultimately come of her life.
During treatment, doctors biopsied her cancer cells, and upon closer inspection, they realized her cells behaved unusually. They multiplied at an incredible rate, doubling roughly every 20 to 24 hours, and under laboratory conditions, they can keep dividing again and again, making them the first widely used immortal human cell line.
Yep.
This made the cells extremely valuable for research purposes. A never-ending supply of cancer cells that could be used for tests, research, trials, and development of new treatments sounds like a researcher's dream. Her cells were distributed to labs across the globe. Jonas Salk even used them in developing the polio vaccine. What a great story, right? Just wait.
Not for her.
About 20 years after Henrietta's death, scientists discovered that her cells had contaminated other cultures in labs around the world. To sort out the mess, they tracked down her family and asked for blood samples. If her cells were so valuable, maybe her family's would be too? There was just one problem. No one in Henrietta's family knew what the heck they were talking about. Henrietta's cells had been harvested and used around the world for 20 years without her permission. And they still are today.
Yeah.
Look, while it's a positive that so much good has come from the research performed on her cells, I think we could also agree it's just not right to have this have happened without her or her family's permission.
Yeah, this is a great example, like a lot of things in history, where we can acknowledge that a bad thing happened while also acknowledging that good came from it, right? It's like looking at people in history. People can have bad, terrible aspects of their character and still do great good.
Since the dawn of time, pregnant women have struggled
thalidomide,
with
yeah.
morning sickness. or nausea associated with carrying a
This
baby.
is awful.
In the 1950s, a new drug called thalidomide hit the market abroad. It was a tranquilizer that could help women sleep and treat morning sickness, allowing them to sail smoothly into motherhood. Felt like modern medicine had a win on their hands, until it was realized that it also caused birth defects in thousands of babies. It's unknown how many miscarriages and stillbirths thalidomide caused, but for the thousands of babies who survived through birth, many had severe injuries affecting their eyes, ears, internal organs, and nerves. Some were born with shortened or fully absent limbs, sometimes with hands or feet attached close to the body. A German pharmaceutical company, Chemie Grünenthal, had been selling the drug without a prescription in West Germany and raking in profits.
And this, for anybody who is inclined to be very libertarian in your politics, and I don't, step into specific policy very often, but this is a perfect example of the importance of government regulation on things like this, right? We need to have some body that is well regulated, that is well that we're making sure is doing things properly, that has accountability, all of those sorts of things. But somebody has to be regulating and making sure that stuff that's getting mass marketed to people, especially pregnant women, is safe, or as safe as possible.
Companies licensed and marketed thalidomide around the world under dozens of different brand names. Countless families had their lives ruined. But interestingly enough, very few of those cases occurred in the U.S.
Really?
Well, the Food and Drug Administration refused to approve thalidomide thanks to a woman named Frances Oldham Kelsey. Richardson Merrill Pharmaceuticals, a U.S. company hoping to sell the drug in America, submitted an application for FDA approval more than once, and Frances always said no, because they never submitted enough reliable safety data. Richardson Merrill was conducting their own safety studies and discovered disfigured fetuses in rats during animal testing. Shockingly, they kept it hidden.
Right. I mean, it should have never gotten to human trials in that case.
Richardson Merrill kept pushing, but Frances stood firm. Who knows how many lives she saved.
And this is one of the dangers of the medical profession being mixed with for-profit industry, right? People are going to overlook things for the sake of making a buck.
Lives she saved by refusing to back down from a shady pharmaceutical company. President Kennedy actually awarded her the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service in 1962. She's a hero. But she's also not alone. In this video, we looked at some of the darkest stains in the history of medicine. Widely corrupt, selfish, and unethical practices that harmed and killed millions. These are the stories that make some of my patients doubtful when we recommend a treatment, and keep many others from even coming to see me or any doctor in the first place. Sadly, it's this cynicism that drives people to the dark corners of the internet for healthcare, making them susceptible to the snake oil salesmen who really are.
Yeah, we talk about snake oil salesmen as a thing from 150 years ago or 100 years ago, but no, we have them today. They just peddle different things, right?
Trying to maximize their profits with smoke and mirrors as they face no scrutiny and little to no liability. But it's also these mistakes that have led to massive reforms. Thalidomide led to a bolstering of the FDA. The Cutter incident improved the guardrails we have for testing and distributing new vaccines. The abuse of patients in the Tuskegee study and the theft of Henrietta Lacks cells helped affirm the notion of informed consent and bodily autonomy in healthcare.
These are great examples of what we talked about at the beginning, which is learning from our mistakes, right? Don't allow, okay, it's awful that it happened, and unfortunately we can't undo the damage that was done to many, many lives in these cases, but we can at least commit to making sure that it's much harder for it to happen again.
Smoking deaths have plummeted in the US in part because of strict advertising regulations. Polio is nearly eradicated, and we continue to make progress in the fight against HIV and AIDS. Medicine is not perfect. It never has been, and it never will be.
No.
Heck, this is why we always say we're practicing medicine, because we could always do better. But I can say quite confidently that the vast majority of people in healthcare, from the doctors and hospitals to the researchers and pharmaceutical companies to the officials and regulatory agencies, genuinely care about making you happier and healthier. There will be exceptions, which is why we must remain healthy skeptics, but I ask that you trust when we say first do no harm and the rest of our oath, we really do mean it. Oh, and I forgot to talk about the wildest one, the doctor who was basically murdered for trying to convince people that they should wash their hands in between patients. That story is truly unbelievable.
Oh, man. Okay, I like Dr. Mike, and I get the feeling from a couple of his videos that we've done now that he does a really good job of trying to be as grounded and as unbiased as possible and just present the information. And I think it comes across very positively. We all have our biases. We all have, our worldviews that are going to skew how we present things, myself included. But I think he does a pretty good job with it, and I, for one, I have really enjoyed his videos. So, in wrapping up, I just want to thank Tommy and Caleb. Unfortunately, I just have your first names, but thank you, Tommy. Thank you, Caleb, for your support on Patreon. I couldn't do it without you. We'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.